Welcome to episode Lucky 13. We have Joel Kadish back. I'm trying to decide whether I'm having you back because you were hilarious the first time. No, he says no.
No, I just feel sorry for me.
No.
That's okay.
But what I realized was, and I, as I try to figure this podcast out and what people really enjoy is that there's a lot of stuff that I do every single day that I take for granted that I know that a lot of people don't have as just stuff that they know every day. That was not eloquent, but we'll just go with it. Anyway, so I haven't told you this, but I think I've decided that you're going to be like our leverages legal.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm totally into
He's
that.
our when
I'm
you're
in for
watching
that.
those shows and they're like, we have our in-house lawyer.
Yeah.
He's now leverages in-house lawyer.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So, time to time, he doesn't know this yet either, that we will call on you for new legislation and all
Sure.
that good stuff. But for
100%.
today,
Yeah, vacant home tax, foreign
oh my
buyers.
God, we're going to do that for another one. But today,
Like,
before he goes on, we're going to just talk about being a buyer.
Yeah.
Because we just came off of a crazy run of a couple of years, COVID-induced, buying homes without conditions, sight unseen, 40 offers in a night, and a lull of which no one thought they wanted to buy houses anymore because the sky was falling, Chicken Little. And it's coming back, and consumer confidence is coming back, and people want to be homeowners again. And I am seeing at times, depending on the product, depending on the area in the
Multiple
city,
offers again.
it's coming back.
Yeah.
It's coming back.
Absolutely.
Not in the same way. Not in the same way. I'm going to say I have seen multiple offers come and still have a home sell under asking. I have had, we just worked on a deal together where we did not have an offer night. We priced to sell at any time, and I ended up with an offer night 48 hours after listing with 9 offers. So it's an interesting market. Okay. So I wanted to have just like a buyer's kind of 101, and that's what this is buyer's 101. I'm a buyer, whether you bought your house 20 years ago, you're going to sell, and you're going to buy up, you're going to buy down, or you're a first-time buyer. I want to talk about that.
Sure. I just want, and I was thinking about this on the weekend, but just to set the ground rules, like we're not talking about pre-construction.
Nope.
And, we're talking about a resale house in the GTA.
Yes, thank you for making that because we could do a whole pre-con.
Whole thing on pre-con
Oh my God.
because there's occupancy closing and final closing, because there's tax implications for investors.
Yeah.
So that's like a whole other topic. So I just want to lay the
Wait
ground
for it,
rules.
people. That's coming.
No, it'll be good. You know what?
It's a good one.
It's a great one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But today we're talking about resale homes in the GTA and a standard, what we'll call a standard offer. And as well as I do, no offer is quote unquote standard. But let's start with that as sort of the ground rules.
But I also want to say, I remember that, and I've been doing this for over 10 years. And I remember in my first year, every single transaction I did, I freaked out about. And I was stressed and I was worried about everything that was going into that, rightly so, by the way. And I remember my husband saying to me, it's going to get better. You're going to get better at this. It won't be as stressful. And by the way, it's not as stressful. But what I did learn is every single one of them is different. Like, it's not like, oh, I've done this 100 times. Yes, I have done it hundreds of times, but not one of them. And I'm sure you can attest to that. Not one of them is the same. So
how many kids do you have?
2.
And I have 3.
I had to think about that.
I think,
I'm jet lagged. I'm sorry.
So, I have 3, and I always say deals are like children. They're special snowflakes.
Yes.
Right? So each deal has a cadence or a rhythm.
Yeah.
Each deal has personalities.
Oh, personalities, yeah.
And,
And circumstance and markets and all of that, for sure.
And I think the one thing I learned early on was it's not about the paper, but it is about the people and managing expectations and what they can expect from start to finish. And that's what we talked about, just sort of what does a lawyer do from start to finish, but start at the offer stage.
Yeah. So, I mean, I get asked a lot is obviously like once you find the place, and we won't go into that part of it and process is we're now at the point where we're going to write up an offer. And, we touched on this in our first conversation was obviously like Sometimes it's not always worth what the paper it's written on.
It can be.
It can
Good
be
faith.
enforceable.
Good faith is so important.
And we always want good faith. But what are those things that we are looking for? And I kind of want to start with, there's a book of clauses, right? So like you get your license.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, unlike when you become a parent, there's no book. We get a book and it's like this thick, and different brokerages have their own clauses and Treb has their own clauses, etc. So we won't bore you with that, but there's a distinction between two types of clauses, which are really, really important. And I learned this very early on in my career is there's a difference between warranting something and making an offer conditional on something. So for example, two of the biggest ones are when you go in to offer on something that is conditional on a home inspection,
Yeah.
which means I need to fulfill that condition. And if I don't feel that it was fulfilled to the buyer's sole discretion, you can walk away from it. It's not as easy as that, but it is to say that, it's just the deal. You can say, I don't want to move forward with it anymore.
It's an oversimplification, but yes, the home inspection clause allows a buyer to hire a professional home inspector. It's odd because home inspectors are not licensed in Ontario
or regulated.
So
Wild West.
And then typically they have in the fine print of their home inspection a limitation of liability. And so whether or not that limitation of liability holds up is a separate matter. But you're going to hire this person who's going to do a complete walk around, and then you're going to decide, look, I didn't know it needed a new roof, and I didn't know there was a leak in the basement, and it's going to cost me $25,000 to fix. So it would be reasonable for me to not proceed under those circumstances if I didn't want to.
Right.
Or it's back in your court
to negotiate.
where you're doing a negotiation of a price reduction or an amendment of some kind. And then, of course, the other thing we see is financing. And
sorry, can I go back to the home inspection a little bit? Because I do get, and you and I have had this conversation as well, in the sense of, because the wording in that clause is to the buyer's sole discretion. So, you can look at a home inspection, and I really need to find a home inspector that I want to do an actual podcast on, because I have my own feelings about home inspections.
Me too. They're garbage.
On a lot of levels. Yeah. And I totally respect that a lot of people want to have them. And I think that they're really good for people who are nervous. I have had clients walk in who are very savvy in renovations and can walk in and say, I don't need to. I know that I'm going to gut this place anyway. I don't need a home inspection. They're $700 when you think about $700 in investment when you're buying average home, $1 million. What is it? Drop in the bucket. Having said that, every dollar counts to everybody. So, and I also the builders love them because home inspectors have never actually built anything. Mm-mm. And I'm not disparaging because I have very good home inspectors that I work with. So I'm like going to backpedal now.
I know a lot of good ones.
You need to find really good ones.
You do.
But the reality is that most of the time they're going to tell you what you can already see.
Correct.
And they're not going to, I think there is a misconception that people believe that it's going to tell you that, and I feel we're going on a tangent, but that they're going to tell you what's going on structurally, and they cannot. They also are not licensed to tell you if there's mold. They cannot tell you if there's asbestos. They cannot tell you anything that they are not qualified to tell you.
And remember, they don't do invasive things. So they're not looking in the walls, and they're
flushing toilets.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
they're flushing toilets.
It's cursory.
Sorry.
Right?
It's I hope none of my home inspectors are watching this.
No, it's not about that. It's about our general anecdotes over thousands of deals and what we see. It doesn't mean they have no value, but the value should be tested. And you have to look at it in
this is the value.
Intelligent way.
The value I see is that if you have a good home inspector, they will walk through the house with you and they will show you everything. And so if you have concerns, you can ask them, you can understand how things have worked. I also believe that after the house is closed and you walk in, you feel comfort in saying, I know that toilet wasn't great. Absolutely. I know I bought it and I know I don't feel duped. I don't feel like I missed that. And you know that if there was something really serious that we could have negotiated. So going back and off that tangent. So that's the idea, is that you can say, wow, this house really wasn't what I thought it was.
Exactly.
Okay. And I want out. I don't want to progress with this deal. I want to walk away. It wasn't for me. And that's happened. Or we really want this house. Like we putting pen to paper takes a lot for buyers, especially in this market. But you know what? We didn't realize the roof was so bad and it's going to cost us $20,000 and we want to be remunerated for that. Right. So how do the two agents sit down and say, want to get this deal done? By the way, the seller does not have to agree. The seller can say, no, you know what? We're going to go back on market.
The contract, if you will, opens up again. So it's either going to die or there's a negotiated settlement, but neither party has to agree to anything, once it's out there.
So this analogy came up in a conversation between you and I. What if I'm just like, you know what? I don't like how the doors close.
Right. So I think, when I say I think, I know, the Supreme Court of Canada says you have an overriding obligation to act in good faith in contract matters.
Right.
And so what does that mean? It means you can't, even though it says sole arbitrary discretion, right, it means you can't actually be arbitrary in the exercise of a condition. So you really need some meat on the bones. Having said that, we don't have many times that it gets tested, but we have had times where a seller has come back and said, "What didn't you like?"
Yeah,
and they have a legitimate right to sort of ask that question. It doesn't happen very often. Most of the times, the seller just wants to get it back on the market, and no one wants to buy a fight. Who's going to buy a fight? Nobody.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting legally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that let's say I do a home inspection and it uncovers something. Now, the buyer,
we talked about this too. Yeah,
the buyer owns that home inspection, does not have to share it.
Right.
Okay. I'm the selling agent and I'm like, what didn't you like? What's going on? And I'm like, if I tell you, you now have to disclose it.
Yeah, and especially realtors.
So sometimes they're not asking.
And we talked about this. There's a difference between realtors and sellers. So realtors have a positive obligation to disclose. Sellers don't. And we talked a little about this in stigma in our last episode. So that's a very real thing. And it comes into play. I also hate when the seller has done a home inspection and hands it to you, because that's worth even less.
Really? I do. I feel like it shows good faith on the market.
But there's a thing called...
not legally. I get it where you're legally.
Legally it's detrimental. So we have this thing called detrimental reliance. I can't, because that inspection isn't addressed to me, I can't rely on it. And so I can't sue on it. I can't do anything. So there's this thing called privity of contract. If you get it for the seller, the buyer has not contracted with the home inspector, and therefore they're out.
Is there now we're getting into, wasn't even going to talk about this, but so it's interesting. I do home inspections for sellers, and I'll tell you why.
I always think they're tainted.
So they are, and I have said this to my buyers, a listing home inspection is very different, and I've worked with many of them, and they will never lie. They will never cover something up, but they will present it in a more positive way.
Spin doctors.
Or it becomes, listen, home inspections need to be to justify why they're there, and they look for problems. That's what home inspectors are. They're not there to tell you how great the house is. They're there to tell you all the problems. So, but for me, it's more, we've priced this house based on X, Y, and Z, and one of those is, this is the home inspection. We know it needs work. We know the furnace is old. We know the roof is old. Don't come back to me after with your buyer's home inspection and tell me this, because I already knew.
You know what's funny? Sometimes I forget how good you are. Because that's...
I paid him to say that.
No. But you have to understand, that's not how most people do it. That's, to me, is transparency. I like that. Yeah. I really love it.
Well, because I want to avoid surprises for my clients.
Most agents just shove those reports and say, here it is, and they don't give that kind of backdrop. To me, I love the backdrop, because then it's an opportunity for a fair negotiation. And the buyer understands what they're bargaining for. What did you get? Right? So I
Sell
like
what you're
that,
selling.
but I just don't generally like those sellers' reports. Buyer, go do your own. And then, we talk about this one clause, but talk about financing a little bit for us.
So again, another condition can be financing, of which, to the buyer's sole discretion, they have, it's usually like anywhere from 5 to 10 days.
So short time.
Short business days. Yeah. Which is not so short, but I've pushed it for 3. Sure. That the buyer has the time to confirm their financing. And that can mean, listen, and this could be a whole other conversation, but being able to, when you're pre-approved, you're actually not pre-approved. The bank gave you some kind of smoke and mirrors number that's based on it. They won't actually give you anything until you have a full-on confirmed contract. So all that being said, because we have so much to talk about, is those things are conditional that allow the buyer and the seller to move towards an end result, like you said, of closing the deal in good faith, but it still means that it's not done.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a firm deal. Like I send you an APS, I said, here's your agreement of purchase and sale, sold firm.
Before you go on, I'm just going to summarize. A pre-approval means you can borrow X amount of dollars.
Yes.
An actual mortgage approval means you can borrow X amount of dollars as against the house you actually want to buy.
Very good point.
So they're two, just to summarize, right? So we have these two very different, the whole protocols and procedures are different in those two things. And it may involve the bank doing a drive-by appraisal or doing an appraisal on their computer systems.
Or not giving it to you, by the way.
Or not giving it to you.
That's a whole other.
And again, so it comes back, the condition comes back, and we say, whoa, our buyer says, I didn't expect that rate. It's not economically viable now for me to purchase that,
right.
So I want out. And that's why we have that condition in there. So those two conditions, in 2021, you just couldn't get them in the deals. Now, it's always great to talk to your agent, to talk to your lawyer, to get different kinds of advice about what those conditions mean. Because from a business perspective, they mean something different than from a legal perspective, right? Because your offers are much more attractive when they don't have conditions on the buyer side, right?
Much.
Yeah.
So having said that, let's say that we have no conditions. And we are going to start warranting things. So those are the two types of clauses.
Representation and warranty. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to say this is the most basic, and we talked about it in our first one, is I'm going to warrant that all chattels and fixtures, chattels are appliances.
Movables. Things you can move.
That are that come with a house.
You got it.
Yes.
Fridge, stove, washer, dryer.
That are going to be in good working order.
Yeah.
And I've had agents now start crossing good out, right? I know, because it's arbitrary. But anyway, we won't go off on that tangent. So great. So, I have a buyer. They get there and they're like, the washing machine is making a noise.
It goes clunk, clunk.
Well, they warranted it.
Sure.
They have to replace it now.
No, they have to give you an 18-year-old Maytag. So whatever was there, they don't have to give you a new washer or dryer. They just have to give you a used washer or dryer of roughly the same vintage. So,
but it also doesn't mean the deal is not
no.
With any warranty, it just means that, again, going back to the good faith idea, is that everybody is warranting that there was no that's the newest one, the grow up, right? Sure. Warranting there was no grow up. We're warranting. Now, what if you find out afterwards there was a grow up? Right. What are your options?
So your options are that you can sue them for breach of the warranty. Now, it's always a question of damages. We don't live in California, so you can't say I was emotionally traumatized and I'm suing for $2 million. Doesn't work in Ontario. What does work is actual out-of-pocket expenses.
Right.
So if I had to do something and pay someone to fix something as a result of the breach of the representation of warranty, I can go and sue them.
Right.
And remember, we do have a small claims court in Ontario, and if you really have the stomach for it, you can do it yourself or hire a paralegal to sue in small claims court for small amounts.
Right.
The number of pieces of litigation that arise from in any given year are so tiny because
who wants to do it?
It's time value of money.
Well, also, it's a cost-benefit analysis, so I'm going to sue them over a stove that doesn't work that's going to cost me, even if it's high-end, $5,000.
And I was going to replace it anyway.
And you probably will replace it anyway versus spending $3,000 just to get legal advice. Advice, and so it's always, without even doing anything.
So it's always a very difficult circular argument that you get in with your clients. But they signed a contract. Yes, I know they signed a contract, but we have to be practical. And you're always practical. We always try, you and I always try and think about like, okay, what practical solution? But that doesn't always work with individuals who are emotionally contracting. And we've talked about this as well. The emotional stakes are always very high.
But I also think it's the age, and I've said this to clients before, is because it's goodwill. And, you know, you always do that. I love the agents. I do it too. I shouldn't say it, but like you do that like closing showing. So you leave the showing to the end to make sure everything's, which you should. And again, it's good faith. And they want to just go in and make sure. And you want to sleep at night knowing that the place looks, or they moved everything out or all that good stuff. I've told clients when I've been negotiating on a property and the other agent doesn't seem to be on top of things and they don't seem to have a good relationship with their client, I find that's when things go wrong the most. Because and I've had it where like my clients will close on a property, they go in the next day and they're like, there's holes in the wall, there's this, there's that. And I call the agent, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let me get someone in there. We're going to get that fixed. And I'm like, thank you. That's great. Because really, what did it cost? And whether they're buying it or like as an agent, I would do it out of my pocket. But if you get someone who's not on top of it, or you don't have that rapport with, that is, and I'll tell my clients flat out. And I hate to say it, but this is there are red flags all over this. Because it is good faith.
I bet you the bulk of our most passionate complaints can be solved for less than $1,000. I bet you.
Oh, for sure.
Right? So when the other agent just says...
Because it is always, principal? Remember principal? What did you say about principal?
It's never about the principal. It's always about the money. But I love when an agent will jump in and just say, look, I'm going to give him $500. Don't worry. It's all good. Right? And then the deal's closed smoothly and everybody feels happy.
I had this literally something that is closing this week for me. And the agent was like, I was planning to give them a big closing present anyway. I'm going to put it towards X of whatever it was. We're going to figure out it on our end and it's done.
Right. Done.
Versus someone losing their mind because an ice maker
and then lawyers getting involved me writing a dumb letter and them writing a dumb response. And really nobody wins from that. Well, you know what I mean? Because the essential part of that just doesn't work.
So takeaway before we move on is you've decided on your price, you've decided on your closing, and now that Schedule A, which is that last page of your offer, which is really where the meat and bones is, that you're going to go over with your agent is so important, but understanding the differences and also understanding the risks on what it means with just a warranty and understanding. And it really goes back to also working with the right people and just getting the right advice and having that managed for you.
And if your agent tells you, hey, we got to put in 5 conditions, that's also a red flag because that offer isn't going to be viable, right? When the selling agent gets it, and especially if there's multiple offers, they're going to say, well, this one isn't, we have to take this one out of the pile because it's not a realistic offer. So we're trying to balance protecting the clients versus the reality of the market.
Yeah,
and that's what we're always trying to do.
Always protect yourself, right? Always protect yourself, but also be realistic. I always say to my clients, I don't want to have you catch a bus. Like, why would you run after a bus you can't catch?
Yeah, I know.
Like, I don't want my clients spinning their wheels. And you need a financing clause in. I understand that. But you also need to understand the risks as we keep going forward, because as you keep putting offers in, I don't want them to just be defeated every single time. How do we talk about that, right?
So let me do for, I don't know how much time we got left, but let me do what happens from a legal perspective, sort of start to finish. So the offer is now firm and binding. All of the conditions have been fulfilled.
Next. Okay, we're done. The place is, what do we do now? By the way, I also want to say this, and I have clients, Joel is unusual in the sense that he will get involved beforehand.
Yeah.
I have dealt with other lawyers that my buyers have wanted to deal with, and they're like, I don't know why you're talking to me, that send it to me when the deal is done. Usually lawyers do not want to see the agreement of purchase and sale until it's firm.
Right.
Unless there's something that they need advice on. They're like, call me when it's done and then I'll deal with it. Sure. So now, assuming that that's the case, I will send the agreement of purchase and sale to your lawyer. I'll let them know. And I am there in the background checking up, but you are now dealing with Joel. And what happens now, Joel?
So I'm starting to do these intro phone calls. So I'll do an intro phone call and I'll tell you what I tell them in the intro phone call. I congratulate them, of course. And I say the most important thing you need to do is satisfy the bank. The bank will want your T4s, they'll want a DNA sample and a hair follicle. Everything. And as you know, from the time we started, the time you started 10 years ago to now, the banks really want more and more stuff. Oh my God, yeah. So be prepared and do that. That is your primary goal right now. That's something you have to focus on. Please give your banker or mortgage broker my contact information. Whether it's a house or a condo, please arrange for home insurance because the bank will require that for closing, and you need it because I am like your mom and I do worry about you, and I don't want to have a flood after closing and have no coverage. And
title. Oh, and I think that was a very good point. Make sure that it's collaborative.
Wait, you almost said title insurance, but we could do a whole thing on title insurance.
We could, but I think that the collaborative part of having you connect with the banker. I mean, I'm always in touch with not only the mortgage broker and the bank, but also with you. Yeah. It's very important that whoever you're dealing with do not work in silos. Everybody needs to be talking to each other.
The team approach.
No, but it's shocking that it doesn't happen. Anyway, go ahead. So we do have title insurance, but we're not talking about it.
We're not going to talk about it. Okay, fine. So we have home insurance. Yeah. And I tell them, look, you got to hook up your gas and hydro accounts. Yeah. The lawyer will notify the tax department about the change of ownership, and that's in Toronto, that's tax, solid waste management, which is also known as garbage, and water.
Utility bills.
So utility bills. So we sort of split up who's doing what on that very specifically. Yeah. And then I tell them, look, I'm going to search title. I'm going to liaise with the seller's lawyer. And then about a week before closing, I'm going to give you final figures. What are final figures? So if you take
let's go back.
Sure.
Why are you searching title?
So I'm searching title because in the agreement of purchase and sale, there's a date that's inserted there, the title search date, and I'm looking for things that are problematic.
Right. So those
historical anomalies.
Issues. Right.
And mostly what I find is the seller has a mortgage, and then we ask the seller's lawyer to take the mortgage off, to pay off the mortgage at closing.
What are some of the other things, for example, that you can find in a...
Title search?
Yeah, title search.
Construction liens, so that would be unpaid contractors. Canada Revenue Agency liens, that would be unpaid personal income tax or HST that your company owes. You might find, we just dealt with this for how long? A furnace contract.
Yeah, a furnace.
So we call those notices of security interest. Yes. So our mutual client was in litigation with the company where he signed one of those horrible contracts for a furnace where the furnace is, $5,000, but they charge them $20,000.
Yeah.
So they're not illegal, but they stopped them door knocking.
Sorry, door knocking.
Yeah. So they used to literally, they would scrape the data. They'd show up in people's driveways on the day of closing and say, "Hey, you need a new hot water tank," and it was really a horrible business.
Which, by the way, is so convenient for so many people, right?
Horrible business.
What about if you're in a condo? Sure. Will title show that you actually own the locker? That you actually own the parking?
We always talk about
I've had that before.
Lockers and parking spots.
Parking spots can be grandfathered.
They can be, there's two different things. They can be owned, or they can be what's called an exclusive use common element, in which case you will not have a separate deed to it, but you do have the exclusive right to use it. And then the older condos, that's what we find. But in the newer condos, mostly lockers are deeded and parking spots are deeded. Court judgments against people.
Right.
We see all kinds of weird and wonderful things. Mostly we don't. If we do find a problem, then we communicate with the client and we say, here's the problem. What do you know about the problem? And then how do we fix the problem?
Right.
And so those are the things that we're looking for.
And if there is a massive problem, there is the opportunity where it is like you're not buying what you thought you were buying. Sure. Like there is an opportunity where and again, I find with my buyers, they're always like, where's that point where like if we find something, can we get out? Like that's, and I think that that's really important for people to understand. Question. And by the way, I actually a gazillion years ago, before I was an agent, we backed out of a cottage buy because we found out that a piece of the property was not actually ours.
Right, it was owned by the municipality.
And they couldn't figure it out. And I remember my lawyer at the time was like, run. Like just no one. It's blind leading the blind. And so walked away.
The standard form agreement of purchase sale, under very specific circumstances, allows for rescission of the contract. Right. So rescission means the contract never existed. Right. We're both put in the same place as if the contract never existed. Mutual you get your release. Deposit back. Right. They can have their property back, right. and that's it. Right. And then lately, since COVID, we changed the way we did everything. So we're doing way more DocuSign now. About a week before closing, you get your final figures. That is the balance of down payment and the closing costs. Closing costs being land transfer taxes, the biggie, and then legal fees, title insurance, and then obviously the mortgage comes in from the lender to me. Right. So you have to deposit the balance of money into my trust account, and then a few days before closing, we get together typically on Zoom. So Zoom and DocuSign are integrated. Oh, okay. So we do a Zoom DocuSign call. And I have to get identification from you, and I explain all the documents. I walk you through the documents. You click away merrily. And then on the day of closing, there's nothing for you to do. That everything is done beforehand.
That's also really big. I've had clients who are like, oh my God, I can't close on that day. I'm not going to be in town.
Right.
That's okay.
That's okay.
It's all being done before.
It's all being done beforehand. And the day of closing is just for my logistics. The money comes in from the bank. And we send the money to the seller's lawyer. They release, electronically transfers to us. Right. We register the transfer, register the mortgage. Deal's closed. I call you. I say, congratulations. Here's a lockbox code. I send you a soft copy of your ownership. Okay. And then to follow is a full reporting letter. Everything you signed, title insurance, deed, mortgage.
It's like this thing.
And it's quite a thick document by email. Yeah. And so the transaction is closed. Of course, we're there to support. You get a wonky tax bill, you get a wonky water bill,
or you get a vacant tax bill that the old
this is we'll talk about we can talk about
we
this
do that another time. Yeah. But I like the best part of what you just said that came out of COVID, and I was not a fan, was the ability to go to a lockbox and get your keys on closing. Yeah. So you no longer have to go deliver your keys to a lawyer's office. You no longer have to go to the lawyer's office to pick up the keys. Like that's, I'm aging myself, but like literally that was the way you had to do it. Like on closing, you had to go get the keys on the day. You had to wait for the money. You had to sit around. And that's like, clients are like, okay, so when do I get the keys? I'm like, oh, they're there already. Just your lawyer will call you with a lockbox.
Super interesting thing is that COVID brought forward a lot of efficiencies.
Oh, especially in the legal.
And remember, the Law Society actually changed its rules. So they responded to the pandemic by saying, okay, let's have virtual signups. Well, oh my God, it's 2022,
You all should digitize yourself. Like you guys were never even.
Nope. So we really took, we really,
came into your own.
Owned it. And we celebrated the fact that we could come into the 19th century, the 18th century.
It's so true.
So clients don't have to take time off work to come to the office now. We'll make a convenient time for a DocuSign Zoom.
I remember you had to take a day off work if you were closing. Now it's like, go and whenever you want.
All my intro meetings are by Teams now. So awesome. I do, and I let them book it themselves so they can go online. They book a Teams 30-minute meeting. Yeah. I meet by Teams, and I do this very thing. So this very sort of introductory, start to finish, I do during that Teams meeting. And then you know what? You can feel them just, right? Totally. It peels off them. Yeah. And it works for two reasons. Number one, it's informative. And number two, just from a customer service standpoint, you feel the stress. This is, and we've talked about this, the largest single financial transaction people do in their lives. Right.
It's crazy.
And so you and I have a lot of respect for our clients and for the process. Yeah. But too many people just blow it off. And I think that's where it gets lost in translation. And I know a lot of lawyers and a lot of realtors, they've done so many deals they've forgotten or don't care anymore. I still love all my clients. I love people. I love their stories. I've met so many interesting people.
So many. We're going to write a book one day, right?
100%. 100%. And in doing that, it's just been such a great ride, and so the technology is being embraced, and I think that's the main takeaway here, is that we're using technology to its fullest to make it efficient for the clients, but to still keep them informed.
I agree.
It's not creating a wall. It actually opened up a whole new way of talking to
totally
people
agree.
that's efficient, right?
totally agree.
I never had the ability to have somebody book meetings on my calendar. Now they just literally book a meeting on my calendar. And then all of a sudden it pops up. I can choose to move it around, but it pops up and I got 30 minutes of time. So
no more house calls.
yeah. So it's always funny because what did we do today? We did buyer. And then we said, but from this conversation, we said we could talk about title insurance.
Totally.
We could talk about
Pre-con.
pre-construction.
Sellers.
We can talk about sellers.
I think sellers will be our next one.
So, over the course of the next little while, I'll be back either, horribly boring you to tears, like, or you'll be really enjoying because you'll be learning something new. But it's funny, even as
we're going to vote on whether Joel gets to stay on the island.
That's right.
That's the next one.
That's right.
Anyway, thank you for
it
being
was
here
awesome.
again.
So much fun.
Always
I
so
really
much
enjoy
fun.
it. Yeah.
Thank you. And
My
thanks
pleasure.
everybody for
Yeah.
always
See you
listening.
again.
It's great.
For sure.
Thanks.